The morning frost clung to the headstones like a shroud of forgotten prayers. Jesse Mackenzie stood alone in the cemetery on the outskirts of Redemption, Texas, his breath forming small clouds in the December air. The sky was pale gray, threatening snow, but never quite delivering. 7 years, 7 winters had passed since he'd last held Catherine's hand, and still the ache felt fresh as an open wound. He knelt before her grave, the cold earth seeping through his trousers. The headstone was simple, carved from local limestone, weathered by wind and time. Catherine Elizabeth Mackenzie, born 1850, died 1876. Beloved wife and mother. The words seemed insufficient for the woman who had been his whole world, but Jesse had never been good with words. He'd always been better with his hands, with hard work, with silence. From his coat pocket, he withdrew a small bundle of dried wildflowers. They'd been Lucy's idea. The child had picked them herself last autumn, pressing them between the pages of Catherine's Bible until they became brittle ghosts of what they'd been. Just like memory, Jesse thought. Just like everything time touches. He placed the flowers at the base of the stone, his calloused fingers gentle against the rough surface. "Catherine," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. The cemetery was empty, save for him and the crows perched in the skeletal cottonwood trees. 7 years and I still don't know what I'm doing. Every morning I wake up and wonder if I'm raising her right, if you'd be proud or disappointed. The wind picked up, scattering dead leaves across the frozen ground. Jesse pulled his coat tighter. "Lucy asked about you again last week. Wanted to know if you could see her from heaven. I told her yes. I hope I'm right about that. I hope you can see her growing. She's got your eyes, your smile. Your stubborn streak too, though she'd deny it." A crow cawed overhead, harsh and lonely. Jesse's throat tightened. 7 years should have been long enough to find peace, to accept that life moves forward, whether you're ready or not. But some wounds don't heal. They just become part of who you are, like old scars that ache when the weather changes. Behind him, he heard the soft crunch of footsteps on frost-covered grass. He didn't turn. There was only one person who would follow him here. "Pa." Lucy's voice was small, uncertain. She was 6 years old, small for her age, with blonde braids that Jesse had learned to plait through years of fumbling practice. She wore the blue coat Catherine had sewn when she was pregnant, let out twice now to accommodate Lucy's growth. In her hands, she clutched a small, wooden horse Jesse had carved for her last Christmas. "I'm here, Lucy girl." She came to stand beside him, her small hand slipping into his larger one. Together, they looked at the headstone, father and daughter, bound by loss and love in equal measure. "Do you think Mama can hear us?" Lucy asked. Jesse considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. He'd never been one to lie to his daughter, even when the truth was hard. "I'd like to think so," he said finally. "I'd like to think she's watching over us, making sure we don't burn the biscuits or forget to feed the chickens." Lucy giggled, a sound that cut through the cemetery's gloom like sunlight through clouds. "You burned the biscuits yesterday, Pa." "I did at that." Jesse allowed himself a small smile. "Maybe your mama was testing me, seeing if I'd learned anything in 7 years. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment. A rabbit darted between the graves, startling them both. Lucy squeezed her father's hand. "Pa, can we go to town now? You promised we could go to the market today." Jesse nodded. Thanksgiving week brought traders from 3 counties, and Redemption transformed into something almost magical. For a child who spent most of her time on an isolated ranch 20 miles from anywhere, the market was the event of the year. "We can go. Let me just say goodbye to your mama." Lucy released his hand and took a few steps back, giving him privacy. Jesse reached out and touched the headstone one last time, his palm flat against the cold limestone. "I'm trying, Catherine," he whispered. "God knows I'm trying. To be the father she needs. To keep her safe. To not let fear turn me into the kind of man my father was." The memory came unbidden, sharp as broken glass. Jesse at 15 watching his younger brother Thomas burn up with fever on a farmhouse floor outside San Antonio. Their father, granite-faced and immovable, refusing to ride for a doctor because doctors were for weak men, for men who couldn't handle their own problems. Jesse could still hear Thomas's labored breathing, could still see the boy's 2 bright eyes as the fever consumed him from within. He'd been too young, too scared of his father's rage to defy him. So Thomas had died while Jesse stood by, helpless and ashamed. That shame had followed him for 20 years, a constant companion he could never quite shake. Then Catherine. Beautiful, kind Catherine who'd seen something worth loving beneath his rough exterior. She'd been the one good thing in his life, the one person who made him believe he could be better than his father, better than the frightened boy who'd let his brother die. But childbirth was dangerous work, even with a doctor present. Jesse had ridden hell for leather through a storm to fetch Dr. Bridger. But by the time they'd returned, Catherine was already slipping away. She'd lived long enough to hold Lucy, to look into Jesse's eyes one final time, to whisper words he still heard in his dreams. Don't let her grow up without a father. Promise me, Jesse. Promise you won't shut yourself away. He'd promised. He'd held her hand as the life drained from her body, as her breathing slowed and stopped, as Lucy cried in the cradle beside them. And in the 7 years since he'd done his best to keep that promise. But keeping a child fed and clothed and safe wasn't the same as truly being present. Jesse knew he'd built walls around his heart thick and high because the alternative was too terrifying. Loving meant losing, and he'd lost too much already. Lucy's voice pulled him back to the present. Are you ready? Jesse stood, his knees protesting the cold. He turned away from Catherine's grave toward his daughter and the life that waited beyond this place of memory and sorrow. I'm ready. The wagon ride into Redemption took the better part of an hour. The road was rutted and frozen, and their horse, an aging mare named Betsy, moved with deliberate care. Lucy sat beside Jesse on the bench, wrapped in blankets, her excitement barely contained. Will there be candy at the market, P, and ribbons? Mrs. O'Brien said there might be a man selling kaleidoscopes. What's a kaleidoscope? Jesse let her chatter wash over him, offering occasional grunts of acknowledgement. The landscape rolled past brown grass and scattered mesquite, the occasional farmhouse sending up thin columns of smoke. Texas in December was a study in browns and grays, all the color leached out by winter's arrival. He thought about Catherine's request, don't shut yourself away. But what did that mean, really? He worked hard, kept the ranch running, made sure Lucy had what she needed. He spoke to neighbors when necessary, attended church most Sundays, fulfilled his obligations as a member of the community. Wasn't that enough? Deep down, he knew it wasn't. He knew Catherine had meant something more. Something about opening his heart to the possibility of connection, of letting people in despite the risk. But 7 years of practiced isolation had made him a stranger to such things. He was polite but distant, present but unreachable. Safe. Redemption appeared on the horizon, a collection of wooden buildings clustered around a dirt main street. The town had been founded 15 years earlier by hopeful settlers who believed redemption, both spiritual and temporal, could be found on the Texas frontier. The name carried weight, a constant reminder that people came here seeking second chances, fresh starts, escape from past mistakes. As they drew closer, Jesse could see the market already in full swing. Wagons lined the street, their beds displaying everything from farm tools to bolts of cloth. People moved between the stalls, examining goods, haggling over prices, greeting neighbors they might not see again until spring. The smell of roasting meat and fresh bread drifted on the cold air. Lucy bounced on the seat, her earlier stillness abandoned. Look, Pa, there's so many people. Jesse guided Betsy to a hitching post near Morrison's general store. He helped Lucy down from the wagon, then secured the horse with practiced efficiency. From his pocket, he withdrew a carefully written list. His neighbor, an elderly widow named Mrs. Patterson, had laboriously spelled out the items she needed. Jesse couldn't read well, but he'd memorized the list during the ride. Flour, salt, coffee, nails. The everyday necessities that kept people alive through another Texas winter. Remember, he told Lucy, taking her hand firmly in his, stay close, don't wander off, and don't talk to strangers. Yes, Pa. They entered the crowd. Jesse was a tall man, broad across the shoulders from years of ranch work, and people tended to move out of his way. He nodded to those he recognized. Old Morrison, who ran the hardware store. The widow O'Brien, who took in sewing. Reverend Cross from the church, his white hair bright in the winter sunlight. Morrison waved them over. He was a weathered man in his 60s with hands gnarled from decades of hard labor. Jesse Mackenzie, Morrison called. Heard you were coming to town. Got those nails you ordered. Jesse approached the hardware stall, Lucy still attached to his hand like a small warm anchor. The smell of oil and metal filled his nostrils, familiar and oddly comforting. Appreciate it, Morrison. Morrison pulled out a cloth sack heavy with nails. His eyes drifted to Lucy and softened. "And Miss Lucy, getting bigger every time I see you." Lucy ducked her head shyly. Morrison turned back to Jesse, his voice dropping. "You hear about Silas Crane?" Jesse's expression didn't change. "Don't know the name. Railroad man, working on the new line west through the hill country. Word is he's hiring. $2 a day for able-bodied men, better than most are offering. I work my own land." Morrison shrugged. "Just passing along what I heard. Fellow's also doing some kind of charity work, taking in orphans, teaching them trades. Heard the judge gave him some kind of official recognition." Jesse paid for the nails, his face impassive. He had no interest in working for anyone, and less interest in the charitable endeavors of strangers. Men who advertised their virtue too loudly often had something to hide. Much obliged for the nails. As they turned to leave, Lucy tugged on his coat. "Pa, you promised about the ribbon for my Sunday dress." "I remember." They made their way through the crowd toward the dry goods section. Jesse kept Lucy close, hyper-aware of how easy it would be to lose a small child in this press of bodies. He'd seen it happen once years ago before Catherine died. A mother's scream cutting through the market noise, the terrible minutes of searching before the child was found crying beside a wagon wheel. Those minutes had aged the mother a decade. Jesse would not let that happen. Not to Lucy, not to the only piece of Catherine he had left. The dry goods merchant was a plump woman named Mrs. Chen, who'd come west from San Francisco. She had ribbon in every color, and Lucy's eyes went wide with possibility. "The blue one, Pa, like Mama's eyes." Jesse's chest tightened, but he nodded. "The blue one it is." While Mrs. Chen measured out the ribbon, Jesse's attention wandered across the market square. The crowd was thicker now, the noise level rising. Cowboys fresh off trail drives spent their wages with abandon. Ranchers compared cattle prices and complained about the weather. Children darted between adults, their laughter high and bright. And then Lucy went still beside him. Her hand, which had been loose in his, suddenly clenched tight. Her whole body tensed, and when Jesse looked down, he saw that all the excitement had drained from her face. "Lucy." She didn't respond. She was staring at something across the market square, her gray eyes, Catherine's eyes, wide and fixed. Jesse followed her gaze. At the far edge of the market, where the legitimate commerce gave way to abandoned crates and broken equipment, something huddled in the shadow of a tilted freight wagon. At first, Jesse thought it was a pile of discarded clothing, the kind of refuse that accumulated in forgotten corners. Then the pile moved. It was a child. A boy, Jesse realized, though malnutrition made age difficult to judge. Maybe 8 years old, maybe younger. He wore trousers that ended 3 inches above his ankles and a shirt so threadbare that Jesse could see the outline of ribs beneath the fabric. No coat, no shoes. His bare feet were pale against the frozen mud, the kind of pale that came before frostbite turned flesh black. But it was the eyes that struck Jesse hardest. Empty eyes, the eyes of someone who'd stopped expecting anything good from the world. "Pa?" Lucy's voice trembled. "Pa, look at him." Jesse looked. The boy sat with his arms wrapped around his knees, trying desperately to conserve what little body heat remained. He wasn't begging, wasn't calling out to passers-by. He simply existed, a small island of suffering in a sea of prosperity. People walked past without seeing him, or perhaps they saw and chose to look away. It was easier that way. Easier to pretend that invisible children didn't exist, that poverty and abandonment were someone else's problem. "Pa," Lucy's voice was stronger now, urgent. "We have to help him." Jesse's jaw tightened. He'd come to this town for nails and ribbon for one good day before winter locked them away on the ranch for months. He hadn't come to get involved in someone else's trouble. Helping meant responsibility. Responsibility meant risk. And risk meant the possibility of loss. But he was looking at this boy, at the emptiness in those eyes, and he was seeing something else. Someone else. Thomas, his brother, 10 years old, burning up with fever while Jesse stood by helpless. The memory hit him like a fist to the chest. For 20 years he'd carried that guilt, that shame. The knowledge that he'd been too scared, too weak to save someone who needed him. "I couldn't save you, Tommy. But maybe I can save this one." The thought came unbidden, unwelcome. Jesse tried to push it away, tried to remember all the reasons why getting involved was a bad idea. He had Lucy to think about, his ranch, his carefully constructed life. But Lucy was pulling on his hand now, her small face tilted up toward his, pleading, "Pa, please. He's going to freeze." Jesse looked at his daughter, 6 years old, and already she had more courage than he'd had at 15, more compassion. She wasn't afraid of getting involved, of caring about a stranger's suffering. She saw someone in need, and her instinct was to help, simple as that. Catherine's daughter through and through. "Stay here," Jesse said, his voice rough. He crossed the market square with long strides, aware of curious eyes following him. The boy didn't look up as Jesse approached, didn't acknowledge his presence at all. He sat motionless, except for the violent shivering that racked his thin frame. Jesse stopped 3 feet away. Up close, it was worse. Bruises yellowing along the boy's jaw. Cuts on his hands, some fresh, some scarred over. A hollowness that went deeper than simple hunger, all the way down into bone and soul. "Hey there, son." Nothing. Not even a flicker of acknowledgement. Jesse knelt down his knees, protesting. He was 36 years old, but felt decades older in moments like this. "You hurt?" Still nothing. The boy's eyes remained fixed on the ground, his body pulled tight into itself. Behind Jesse, small footsteps approached. Lucy appeared at his elbow, her concern overriding her usual obedience. She knelt beside him in the mud, heedless of her good dress, and reached into her coat pocket. She pulled out one of the peppermint sticks Jesse had bought her earlier, still wrapped in the wax paper. With careful deliberation, she held it out toward the boy. "Are you hungry?" The boy's eyes moved then, just barely. They fixed on the candy with the kind of focus that comes from knowing hunger as a constant companion. But he didn't reach for it, didn't move, as if he didn't believe it was real, or didn't believe he deserved it. "Go on," Jesse heard himself say, his voice rougher than intended. "Take it." Slowly, so slowly, it was almost painful to watch the boy's hand creep forward. His fingers were raw nails, broken and dirty, the hands of someone who'd done hard labor far beyond what any child should endure. When he took the peppermint stick, he clutched it so tight Jesse thought the candy might shatter. Then he unwrapped it with shaking hands and put it in his mouth. Not eating it, just holding it there, as if afraid someone would take it back. "When did you last eat?" Jesse asked. The boy's throat worked. He pulled the candy from his mouth, and his voice came out like sandpaper on wood. "Don't remember, sir." Lucy's hand went to the boy's shoulder, gentle as a whisper. She was crying now, tears cutting clean tracks through the dust on her cheeks. "But we have to help him." Jesse's hands clenched into fists. The smart thing, the safe thing would be to walk away. Give the boy some money, point him toward the church, let Reverend Cross handle it. That was what most men would do. That was what Jesse had trained himself to do for 7 years, ever since Catherine died. Don't get involved. Don't let anyone in. Don't risk your heart. But he was looking at this boy and seeing Thomas, seeing every person he'd failed to save, every moment of cowardice he'd never forgiven himself for. "Where's your people?" Jesse tried again, though he already knew the answer. The boy flinched, an actual physical recoil, as if Jesse had raised a hand to strike him. "Don't have people. Everyone's got someone. Mother, father." The boy's voice dropped to barely a whisper. "Dead, both of them." "When?" A pause. "I was 5. Jesse did the math. 3 years. This child had been surviving alone for 3 years. The knowledge sat heavy in his gut like stones. "You got a name?" The silence stretched so long Jesse thought the question would go unanswered. Then, barely audible over the market noise, "Emmett, Emmett Cole. I'm Jesse Mackenzie. This is my daughter Lucy May." Lucy wiped her eyes and tried to smile through her tears. "Hi, Emmett." The boy and Emmett stared at her like he'd never seen kindness before and didn't know what to do with it. Jesse stood, his decision made before his conscious mind caught up. Some part of him knew this was a mistake, that bringing this child into his life would complicate everything, would crack open the walls he'd so carefully constructed. But another part, the part that still heard Thomas's labored breathing and nightmares, the part that remembered Catherine's final words, knew he couldn't walk away. "You hungry for more than candy?" Jesse asked. The smallest nod. "All right then, come on." Jesse held out his hand. Emmett stared at it, calculating, weighing survival against whatever hell he was running from. Then with the hesitation of someone who'd been betrayed before he placed his small freezing hand in Jesse's calloused palm. The contact sent a jolt through Jesse, the fragility of those thin fingers. The ice-cold skin, the way the boy's hand trembled, not just from cold, but from fear or hope, or both. He pulled Emmett to his feet gently. The child swayed his legs, barely holding him. "Can you walk?" "Yes, sir." They made slow progress back through the market. Jesse kept his pace measured so Emmett could keep up. People glanced at them, a rancher and his well-dressed daughter leading a half-frozen street child, but no one stopped them. That was frontier courtesy. Mind your business. Let others mind theirs. Jesse led them to Morrison's general store where Hank Morrison ran a small restaurant operation in the back room. It wasn't much, just a few tables and a wood stove, but Morrison served hot food and didn't ask too many questions. Morrison was leaning against the counter when they walked in. His eyes tracked immediately to Emmett, taking in the ragged clothes, the bare feet, the hollow cheeks. Something like pity crossed his weathered face. "Jesse Mackenzie. Didn't expect to see the buying twice in one day. Need hot food. You got stew." Morrison's gaze lingered on Emmett. "Got beef stew on the stove out back." "How many bowls?" "3, and coffee." Morrison nodded and disappeared through the rear door. Jesse guided Emmett and Lucy to the small table in the corner, the one Morrison kept for customers who wanted to eat on the premises. "Sit." Emmett lowered himself into the chair like he expected it to collapse beneath him. His eyes darted around the store, tracking exits, measuring distances, always looking for escape routes. The behavior of an animal that had learned the hard way that safety was temporary and danger could come from anywhere. Lucy sat beside him, close but not touching. She'd pulled out her handkerchief and was wearing the edge of it between her fingers. "Are you cold, Emmett? We could get you a blanket." "I'm fine, miss. You can call me Lucy." She offered him a tentative smile. "We're friends now." The boy's face did something complicated, as if he wanted to believe her but didn't dare. Morrison returned with 3 bowls of stew and a pot of coffee that smelled like salvation. Jesse paid in silver coins, then set a bowl in front of Emmett. "Eat slow. You'll make yourself sick otherwise." Emmett stared at the stew like it might vanish if he blinked. Then he picked up the spoon with shaking hands and took a careful bite. His eyes closed. For just a moment, the fear left his face, replaced by something that looked almost like relief. Lucy ate her stew with neat small bites, watching Emmett the whole time. Jesse poured coffee for himself and milk for the children, letting the warmth seep into his hands while he observed. Emmett was methodical, controlled, each spoonful deliberate, as if he was rationing even abundance. That kind of discipline came from living hungry, from never knowing when the next meal might come. Jesse waited until the boy had eaten half the bowl before speaking again. "Emmett, I need you to tell me the truth. Are you in trouble?" The spoon clattered against the bowl. Emmett's hands clenched into fists, and his breathing quickened into short, panicked gasps. "Easy, son." Jesse kept his voice level, the same tone he used with spooked horses. "I'm not turning you over to anybody. Just need to know what we're dealing with." Emmett's eyes flicked up, searching Jesse's face for the lie, the trap, the betrayal he'd learned to expect from adults. "I promise," Jesse added, and he meant it with a certainty that surprised him. The boy's breathing slowed, but his hands stayed fisted. When he finally spoke, the words came out barely above a whisper. "There's men. They'll be looking for me." Jesse's blood went cold. "What kind of men?" "The kind that buy kids, or take them, make them work." Every muscle in Jesse's body went taut. This child had spent 3 years in hell, and Jesse hadn't known. Nobody had known. Or if they'd known, they hadn't cared. "How many kids are still there?" Emmett's eyes filled with tears, but he blinked them back hard. "Last I counted 23. But some die. New ones come." Jesse's hands tightened around his coffee cup until his knuckles went white. He forced himself to breathe, to think past the white-hot rage building in his chest. "Who runs this gang?" "Man named Silas Crane. Got 2 others with him, Boone and Clay. They're mean, but Crane's worse. He likes hurting us. Says it builds character." The name landed like a stone in Jesse's gut. Silas Crane. The same man Morrison had mentioned earlier. The railroad contractor doing charitable work, taking in orphans, earning recognition from judges. "How'd you get away?" Waited till they were drunk, cut the rope with broken glass, ran for 3 days, hid in hay wagons when I could, walked when I couldn't. 3 days. This child had survived 3 days alone running from men who would kill him if they caught him. And you ended up here, Emmett nodded. Thought redemption was far enough. Thought maybe I could hide. His voice cracked. But if they find me, they'll kill me. Crane said so. Said if anyone ran, he'd make an example. Lucy's hand tightened on Emmett's fist. Her face was set with determination that reminded Jesse painfully of Catherine. We won't let them find you, she declared. Jesse looked at his daughter, 6 years old and already braver than most men he knew. Then he looked at Emmett at the fear and desperate hope warring in those two old eyes. He thought about Thomas dying because Jesse was too afraid to act. He thought about Catherine making him promise not to shut himself away. He thought about the man he'd become in 7 years of isolation and the man he'd once hoped to be. The decision crystallized. Finish your stew, Jesse said. Then we're going home. Emmett's eyes went wide. Home. My ranch, 20 miles north of here. You can stay there, get warm, get fed, figure things out. But I don't have to. I can manage on my own. I always have. Jesse leaned forward, his voice gentle but firm. Son, you're 8 years old. You shouldn't have to manage on your own. And you don't have to. Not anymore. But what if they come looking? Then they'll have to go through me. The words hung in the air between them. A promise, a declaration, a line drawn in the sand. Emmett stared at Jesse and slowly, so slowly, something shifted in his expression. The emptiness didn't disappear, but underneath it, something else flickered to life. Something small and fragile that looked almost like hope. Okay, he whispered. Lucy bounced in her seat, barely containing her excitement. You're going to love the ranch, Emmett. We have horses and chickens and a creek where you can catch frogs in the summer. And Pa makes the best flapjacks. And I can teach you to read if you don't know how. And we can be like brother and sister. Emmett looked at her like she was speaking a foreign language, as if the concept of family was something he'd forgotten how to understand. I don't know how to be a brother. Lucy's smile was pure sunshine. That's okay. I'll teach you. They finished their meal in a different kind of silence. Not uncomfortable, but tentative, like all three of them were feeling their way through unfamiliar territory. When the bowls were empty, Jesse stood. We need to get you warmer clothes before we head out. He led them to a stall selling second-hand items. The merchant, a thin woman with sharp eyes, watched as Jesse sorted through the piles. He found a wool coat that was too big, but would keep the boy warm, a pair of boots that were scuffed but solid, thick socks, a hat with ear flaps. Emmett took each item like it was made of gold. When Jesse helped him into the coat and buttoned it up, tears began to slide down the boy's cheeks. No one's ever... He stopped, unable to finish. Jesse's throat tightened. Well, someone is now. They loaded the wagon in silence. Jesse lifted Lucy into the seat first, then reached down to help Emmett climb aboard. The boy hesitated, staring at Jesse's outstretched hand as if it might be a trap. It's all right, Jesse said quietly. Emmett took his hand and climbed up. Jesse settled him between Lucy and himself, making sure the coat was buttoned tight against the cold wind that had picked up. The ride back to the ranch would take 2 hours. The sun was already sinking toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. Jesse clicked his tongue, and Betsy started forward, her hooves finding purchase on the frozen road. Redemption fell away behind them, and the prairie opened up ahead and empty and beautiful in the fading light. Lucy chattered about the market, about the ribbon she'd gotten, about the dress she'd wear to Christmas service. Emmett listened without responding, but Jesse saw the way the boy leaned slightly toward Lucy, drawn to her brightness like a moth to flame. The first stars were appearing when they crested the final rise and the ranch came into view. It wasn't much. A cabin built from logs Jesse had cut himself, a barn for the horses, a chicken coop, corrals for the few cattle he ran, but it was solid. It was home. Jesse pulled the wagon to a stop and climbed down. He helped Lucy first, then turned to Emmett. The boy sat frozen in the seat, staring at the cabin like he couldn't believe it was real. Come on, Jesse said gently. Let's get you inside. Emmett climbed down slowly, his legs shaking. Whether from cold or emotion, Jesse couldn't tell. Lucy grabbed Emmett's hand and pulled him toward the cabin. Wait till you see inside. Pa built the whole thing himself. And we have a real stove, not just a fireplace. And there's a loft where you can sleep. It's warm up there. She pushed open the door and dragged Emmett inside. Jesse followed carrying the supplies. The cabin was cold. The fire had died to embers while they were gone. But it was shelter, and after the brutal cold of the open prairie, that was enough. Jesse moved with practiced efficiency, building up the fire, filling the kettle, pulling out blankets. Lucy helped without being asked, her small hand quick and capable. Emmett stood in the middle of the room, turning slowly, taking it all in. The rough-hewn furniture, the shelves lined with books, the bearskin rug, the rifle mounted above the door. "You can sleep up there." Jesse pointed to the loft ladder. "It's warm and there's extra blankets. Lucy will show you." "I can sleep on the floor," Emmett said quickly, anxiously. "Don't want to be trouble." "You're not trouble, and the floor's too cold. Go on." Lucy took Emmett's hand again and led him to the ladder. She climbed up first, nimble as a squirrel, and Emmett followed more slowly, his movements careful and deliberate. Jesse stood alone in the firelight, listening. Lucy's voice drifted down, showing Emmett where to sleep, how to arrange the blankets, chattering on about everything and nothing. And beneath her voice, Emmett's quiet wonder, the sound of a child who'd forgotten what safety felt like, slowly remembering. Jesse poured himself coffee and stood at the window, looking out at the darkening prairie. Somewhere out there, men were looking for Emmett, men who thought they owned him, men who would come here if they knew where to look. Let them come. The thought surprised him with its fierceness. He'd spent 7 years avoiding trouble, avoiding connection, avoiding anything that might crack open the carefully constructed walls around his heart. But this boy had walked through those walls like they were made of paper. Or maybe it was Lucy who'd done it with one simple question at the market. "Can we help him, Pa?" Jesse didn't know yet if keeping Emmett was the right choice. Didn't know if he had the strength to protect this child from the monsters hunting him. Didn't know if his heart could survive caring about someone again only to lose them. But he knew he couldn't walk away. Couldn't leave Emmett to freeze in that market square. Couldn't send him back to the hell he'd escaped. So he'd made a choice. Maybe a foolish one. Maybe a dangerous one. But it was his choice, and he would live with the consequences. He heard footsteps on the ladder, turned to see Emmett climbing down, moving quiet as always. "Can't sleep." The boy shook his head. "Too many thoughts." "I know that feeling." Emmett came to stand beside him at the window. They stood in silence for a while, looking out at the night. The stars were brilliant, sharp as diamond chips against the black sky. "Mr. Mackenzie." "Jesse." Jesse, the name came out tentative. "Why are you helping me?" Jesse considered the question. He could give the easy answer. "Because it's the right thing to do. Because you need help. Because my daughter asked." But this boy deserved more than easy answers. "I had a brother once," Jesse said slowly. "Thomas. He died when he was 10. Fever took him. I was 15 and I couldn't save him. Couldn't do a damn thing except watch him slip away." He paused, the old grief rising up. "I've spent 20 years wishing I could go back. Wishing I could have done something different. But I can't. Tommy's gone. But you're here, and maybe I can't save everyone. Maybe I can't fix everything that's broken in this world. But I can give you a warm place to sleep and food to eat. And that's a start." Emmett looked up at him, and in the firelight his eyes were wet. "No one's ever helped before." Jesse's throat tightened. "Well, someone's helping now." They stood together in the silence. Outside, wind howled through the prairie grass. Inside, the fire crackled, and Lucy's soft breathing drifted down from the loft. Emmett's hand crept into Jesse's, small and cold and trusting. Jesse looked down at their joined hands, at this fragile connection, this unlikely family taking shape in the ruins of grief and loss. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring. Didn't know if Silas Crane would come. Didn't know if he was strong enough to protect this boy. But he knew one thing. He was going to try on, because Catherine had been right. Shutting yourself away wasn't living. It was just a slow kind of dying. And maybe, just maybe, this frightened child with the empty eyes was offering Jesse something he thought he'd lost forever. A second chance. Not at redemption, because Jesse had long since stopped believing in that, but at being the man he'd always wanted to be. The man who stood up when others walked away. The man who kept his promises no matter the cost. The fire popped, sending up a shower of sparks. Jesse squeezed Emmett's hand gently. "Come on, let's get you back to bed. Tomorrow's going to be a long day." Tomorrow he would figure out what to do about Silas Crane and his legal papers. Tomorrow he would start asking questions, making plans, preparing for the fight he knew was coming. But tonight he had a warm cabin and 2 children sleeping safely under his roof. And for now, in this moment, that was enough. Frost painting intricate patterns on the cabin windows. Jesse woke before dawn as he always did, his body trained by years of ranch work to rise with the darkness. He lay still for a moment, listening to the sounds of the house. Lucy's soft breathing from her small room, the creak of timbers settling, and from the loft a different sound. Restless movement, the rustle of blankets, a small muffled whimper. Jesse rose quietly and dressed in the gray pre-dawn light. He moved to the stove and began building up the fire, the routine motions giving his hands something to do while his mind worked through the problem he'd brought home yesterday. Emmett Cole, 8 years old, running from men who claimed legal ownership of him. Jesse had spent half the night lying awake thinking through the implications. If what Emmett said was true and Jesse had no reason to doubt it, then Silas Crane had paperwork. Legal guardianship signed by a judge. That made Jesse's position precarious at best, criminal at worst. Harboring a runaway could land him in jail, could cost him everything. But the alternative was unthinkable. He heard movement from the loft, soft footsteps on the ladder. Jesse turned to see Emmett descending, moving with the careful silence of someone who'd learned that being noticed meant being hurt. The boy wore the clothes Jesse had bought him yesterday. In the morning light, Jesse could see details he'd missed before. The way Emmett's shoulders were permanently hunched as if expecting a blow. The faded scars on his hands. The haunted wariness in his eyes that no 8-year-old should possess. "Morning," Jesse said, keeping his voice low so as not to wake Lucy. "Morning, sir." Emmett stood awkwardly in the middle of the room, uncertain of his place. "Told you last night, it's Jesse." "Yes, sir, I mean Jesse." The name came out hesitant, as if Emmett wasn't sure he had permission to use it. "You sleep all right?" Emmett's hands twisted together. "Better than I have in 3 years." The simple honesty of the statement hit Jesse like a fist. Better than in 3 years. What kind of hell had this child endured that a loft in a stranger's cabin felt like luxury? Jesse turned back to the stove, giving Emmett space. "I'm making breakfast. You like eggs?" "I like anything, sir." Jesse cracked eggs into the pan, added salt pork, set biscuits to warm. The familiar rhythm of cooking calmed his thoughts. When the food was ready, he set 3 plates on the table. "Go wake Lucy. Tell her breakfast is getting cold." Emmett climbed back up the ladder. Jesse heard muffled voices, Lucy's sleepy protest, then her delighted squeal when she remembered their guest. Moments later, both children descended, Lucy already chattering. "Did you sleep good?" Emmett isn't the loft cozy pa, made it himself. He built this whole cabin by himself after Mama died. He's real good at building things. They sat down to eat. Jesse watched Emmett out of the corner of his eye. The boy ate slowly, methodically, as if still not quite believing the food was real. No grabbing, no gorging, just steady, controlled consumption that spoke of hard lessons learned. Lucy filled the silence with her endless stream of observations and questions. What was Emmett's favorite color? Did he like horses? Could he swim? Had he ever seen the ocean? Emmett answered in monosyllables when he answered at all, but Lucy didn't seem to mind. She decided they were going to be friends, and in her 6-year-old certainty, that made it so. After breakfast, Lucy insisted on showing Emmett the ranch. Jesse watched from the porch as she dragged him around, introducing him to the horses, the chickens, the barn cat who barely tolerated humans. Emmett followed her dutifully, his thin frame swimming in the oversized coat, his expression caught between wonder and disbelief. The scene should have been peaceful, 2 children playing in morning sunlight. But Jesse couldn't shake the tension coiling in his gut. The sense that this fragile peace was temporary, that danger was coming, whether he was ready or not. He was washing the breakfast dishes when he heard it, the sound that made his blood run cold. Hoofbeats. 3 horses. Coming fast from the south. Jesse dried his hands and moved to the rifle above the door. He pulled it down, checked the load, then stepped outside. His movements were calm, deliberate, but his heart hammered against his ribs. Lucy and Emmett were at the corral. Jesse called to them, keeping his voice level, despite the adrenaline flooding his system. "Lucy, Emmett, get inside, now." Lucy's smile faded. She looked toward the approaching riders, then back at her father. The fear in his voice cut through her usual stubbornness. "Pa, Inside, both of you, don't come out till I say. Emmett had gone pale as milk. He grabbed Lucy's hand and pulled her toward the cabin. They disappeared inside and Jesse heard the door close. He stood in his yard rifle, held loose but ready, and waited. The riders slowed as they approached. They fanned out, forming a line 20 feet from where Jesse stood. Professional, coordinated. Men who'd done this before. The man in the middle was tall and broad-shouldered, maybe 45, with a scar running down his left cheek like a lightning strike. He wore a black coat and a flat-brimmed hat, and his eyes were the color of stone. Cold. Calculating. The eyes of a man who viewed other people as resources to be exploited. The two flanking him were younger. One tall and thin, with a face like a hatchet. The other short and heavy, his gut straining against his vest. Both wore gun belts, the leather well-oiled and maintained. The scarred man smiled, but the expression never reached his eyes. Morning. His voice was smooth, cultured even. The voice of an educated man, which somehow made him more dangerous. Named Silas Crane. Jesse said nothing. He'd learned long ago that silence was often the best response. Let the other man fill the void. Let him reveal himself. Crane's smile widened slightly. I'm looking for a boy, about 8 years old, dark hair, skinny. He ran off from my camp 3 days back. Thought maybe you might have seen him. This is private property, Jesse said, his voice flat, and I haven't seen any runaways. That's so. Crane's gaze drifted past Jesse toward the cabin. Sounds like you got kids here, though. I can hear them. Just my daughter. Mind if we take a look? Won't take but a minute. I do mind, and I'm asking you to leave. The smile vanished from Crane's face like water poured on a fire. His expression went hard, all pretense of civility dropping away. Now hold on, that boy is my legal ward. I got papers from Judge Whitmore in Austin. I took him in when nobody else would, gave him food and shelter and training, and he repaid me by stealing supplies and running off. That makes him a thief. Jesse's grip tightened on the rifle. Every instinct screamed at him to shoot, to put a bullet in this man's chest and end the threat. But killing Crane wouldn't solve anything. It would only make Jesse a murderer and leave Emmett with nowhere to go. You got no rights on my land, Jesse said quietly, and I'm done being polite. Turn around, ride out. Don't come back. The thin man, the one Crane had called Boone, spat into the dirt. Big talk for one man alone. I'm not alone, Jesse said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. I got 30 rounds in this Spencer, and I don't miss. You want to test that? Go ahead. The air went tight as a drawn bow. For a long moment, nobody moved. The only sound was the wind rustling through the dry grass and the nervous stamp of horses' hooves. Crane studied Jesse with the calculating gaze of a man weighing odds. Jesse let him see the answer in his eyes. Yes, I will shoot. Yes, I will kill you if you try to take that boy. Finally, Crane raised a hand. His men settled back in their saddles, the tension easing fractionally. This isn't over, Mackenzie. Crane's voice was ice wrapped in velvet. That boy's mine by law. I'll be back with the sheriff. With papers. And when I am, you'll hand him over or you'll go to jail for harboring a fugitive. Get off my land. For another heartbeat, nobody moved. Then Crane jerked his reins, turning his horse with more force than necessary. The animal tossed its head, startled. We'll be back. They rode off at a canter, dust rising in their wake. Jesse stood watching until they disappeared over the rise. Even then, he waited another 5 minutes, making sure they weren't circling back. His hands were steady on the rifle, but inside his heart raced. Finally, he lowered the weapon and turned toward the cabin. Lucy and Emmett stood in the doorway. Lucy's face was pale. Emmett looked like he might be sick, his skin gone gray, his eyes too wide. Jesse walked over to them, still carrying the rifle. It's all right, they're gone. That was him. Emmett's voice came out, broken, barely a whisper. That was Crane. I know. He'll come back. He always comes back. And next time he'll have the law. He'll have papers. The boy's breathing was coming faster, panic setting in. I'll have to go with him. Jesse knelt down so he was eye level with Emmett. He set the rifle aside and put his hands on the boy's thin shoulders, feeling the sharp edges of bone beneath the fabric. Listen to me, Emmett. I don't care what papers he's got. I don't care if he brings the whole damn army. You're staying here as long as you want to. Understand? But sometimes the law is wrong. Jesse's voice was firm, unyielding. And sometimes a man has to do what's right even when it's not legal. Emmett's eyes filled with tears. Why would you do this? You don't even know me. Jesse thought about his answer, about Thomas, about Catherine, about 7 years of loneliness and fear, about the moment Lucy had asked if they could keep this boy, and something inside Jesse had cracked open. Because my daughter asked me to, he said simply, and because it's the right thing to do, and because he paused, searching for words, because you remind me that there's still good worth fighting for in this world. A tear slid down Emmett's cheek. Lucy wrapped her arms around him from the side, fierce and protective. You're my brother now, she said, her voice carrying all the certainty of childhood. And nobody takes my brother. Jesse stood and looked out at the prairie, at the dust still settling where Crane and his men had ridden. He'd made his choice, drawn his line, and now he'd have to live with the consequences. But as he looked at these two children, at the hope and fear and trust in their eyes, he knew he'd make the same choice again. Some things were worth fighting for. Some battles had to be fought even when you knew the one. And this boy, this lost, broken, brave child, was worth every risk. Come on, Jesse said, putting his hand on Emmett's shoulder. Let's get back inside. We've got plans to make. The threat hung over the ranch like storm clouds gathering on the horizon. Jesse knew Crane would return. Men like that always did. They didn't forgive defiance, and they didn't forget debts they believed were owed. That afternoon, after he'd settled the children with tasks to keep them occupied, Jesse saddled his horse and rode into town. The journey gave him time to think, to plan, to consider his options. None of them were good. Crane had legal papers. That was the bedrock problem. A judge had signed guardianship documents, which meant Crane had the weight of law behind him. Jesse, on the other hand, had nothing. No legal claim, no paperwork. Just a moral certainty that sending Emmett back to that camp would be tantamount to murder. But moral certainty didn't win in court. Law did, money did, and Crane had both. Jesse needed allies. People who could stand up in front of a judge and testify to his character, to Emmett's condition, to the truth of what was happening. He needed evidence. And most of all, he needed someone who knew how to fight this kind of battle. His first stop was the church. Reverend Samuel Cross was in his office, a small room behind the sanctuary that smelled of old books and pipe tobacco. He was 58 years old, with white hair and kind eyes that had seen their share of suffering without becoming hardened by it. Jesse, Cross stood offering his hand, and Miss Lucy, this is a surprise. Jesse had brought Lucy with him, unwilling to leave her alone at the ranch even for a few hours. She sat quietly in a chair while Jesse explained the situation, laying out everything Emmett had told him about Crane's camp. Cross listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker with each detail. When Jesse finished, the Reverend sat back in his chair, fingers steepled beneath his chin. This is a serious accusation, Jesse. You understand that if what you're saying is true, then Judge Whitmore signed papers that gave Crane legal cover to abuse children. I know what I'm saying. And you believe the boy, you're willing to stake everything on his word. Jesse thought about Emmett's hollow eyes, the scars on his back, the way he flinched at sudden movements. I believe him. Cross nodded slowly. Then you're going to need help. Crane has money. He has influence. He has the law on his side. What do you have? The truth. The truth isn't always enough. Cross rose and moved to the window, looking out at the quiet street. But it's a start. You'll need a lawyer, someone who's not afraid to go up against Judge Whitmore. You know anyone like that? Maybe Samuel Graves. He's old, semi-retired, but he's honest, and he doesn't owe Whitmore any favors. Cross turned back to Jesse. But even with a good lawyer, you'll need witnesses, character references, people willing to stand up in court and vouch for you. Will you? The question hung in the air. Cross could say no. It would be the smart thing, the safe thing. Getting involved in this kind of fight could cost him his position, his reputation, everything he'd built. But Cross had been a minister for 30 years. He'd dedicated his life to standing up for those who couldn't stand up for themselves. And if he wouldn't do it for a child, then what was the point of any of it? I'll testify, Cross said. I'll stand in front of Judge Whitmore himself and say you're 10 times the man Silas Crane will ever be. Relief flooded through Jesse, loosening the tight knot in his chest. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. This is going to get ugly, Jesse. Crane won't go down without a fight. And Whitmore, the man has been on the bench 20 years. He doesn't like being told he made a mistake. Then we'll have to make him see he was wrong. Cross shook his head, but there was respect in his eyes. Catherine would be proud of you, you know. She always said you had more courage than you gave yourself credit for. The mention of his wife made Jesse's throat tighten. He managed a nod, not trusting himself to speak. His next stop was Dr. Henry Bridger's office. The old physician was 62 with gnarled hands and sharp eyes that missed nothing. He'd been practicing medicine on the Texas frontier for 3 decades, had seen every kind of injury and illness imaginable. When Jesse explained what he needed, Doc Bridger set down the instrument he had been cleaning and looked at Jesse over the rim of his spectacles. You want me to examine the boy and document his injuries? For court, for evidence. That'll put me in the middle of a legal fight. I know, I'm asking anyway. Doc studied him for a long moment. Then he stood and reached for his medical bag. Let's go see this boy. At the ranch, Doc spent 20 minutes examining Emmett in the privacy of Jesse's bedroom. Jesse waited outside with Lucy listening to the murmur of voices, the occasional sharp intake of breath from the doctor. When Doc emerged, his face was grim. He gestured for Jesse to follow him outside out of earshot of the children. That boy's been tortured, Jesse. Doc's voice was low and hard. No other word for it. He's got healed fractures in 3 ribs. Rope burns on his wrists that scarred over. Burns on his feet from walking on hot ground without shoes, and his back. Doc's hands clenched into fists. His back looks like someone used a whip on him. Multiple times. Jesse's vision went red at the edges. He forced himself to breathe, to think past the rage. How bad? Bad enough that I want to raid to that camp and put a bullet in Silas Crane myself. Doc took a breath, forcing calm. But that won't help the boy. What will help is getting him away from that monster permanently. The deaths. With each detail, Doc's face grew harder, his jaw tighter. Jesus, Doc breathed when Jesse finished. How many have died? Emmett didn't say, but from the way he talks, more than a few. We need to get the law involved. Real law, not Whitmore's brand of justice. Working on it? Jesse paused. You know Marshal Tom Hastings, federal marshal out of Austin. By reputation, good man from what I hear. I'm sending him a telegram today. If we can get federal charges brought against Crane, it might give us leverage in the custody case. Doc nodded approval. Smart, very smart. But even with federal involvement, you're still looking at a hell of a fight. I know. Doc clapped him on the shoulder. Then I guess we better get ready for it. Jesse's final stop that day was the telegraph office. He'd written out the message carefully, each word chosen for maximum impact. Marshal Hastings, stop. Austin, Texas, stop. Urgent matter, child welfare, stop. Evidence of forced labor and murder, stop. Request immediate assistance, stop. Jesse McKenzie, stop. Redemption, Texas, stop. The telegraph operator. A nervous man named Sykes read it twice, his Adam's apple bobbing. This is serious business, Mr. McKenzie. That's why I'm sending it. You understand this will stir up trouble. Crane's got friends. Then his friends can explain why they're protecting a man who murders children. Sykes swallowed hard and nodded. I'll send it right away. Jesse paid and turned to leave. As he reached the door, Sykes called after him. Mr. McKenzie, for what it's worth, I hope you win. The words stayed with Jesse on the ride home. Such a small thing, such a simple statement of support. But it mattered. In a fight against money and power and corrupted law, every voice of support mattered. 3 days later, a man rode up to Jesse's ranch. He was in his mid-40s with iron gray hair and steady eyes. He wore a federal marshal's badge pinned to his vest and carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who'd faced down worse than Silas Crane. Mr. McKenzie, I'm Marshal Tom Hastings. Got your telegram. Jesse invited him in, offered coffee, then laid out everything. Emmett's story, the medical evidence, the deaths Crane had covered up. Hastings listened without interrupting, making occasional notes in a small leather-bound book. When Jesse finished, Hastings set down his coffee cup and leaned back in his chair. I'll be honest with you, Mr. McKenzie, this is going to be hard to prove. Crane's operation is in federal territory, which gives me jurisdiction. But the guardianship papers are a state matter. Judge Whitmore signed them, and state judges don't like federal marshals telling them they made a mistake. What can you do? I can investigate the camp, document what I find. If there's evidence of murder or forced labor, I can arrest Crane on federal charges. That might give us leverage in the custody case. How long will that take? Hastings pulled out a pocket watch, studied it. Hearings in 12 days, you said. Jesse nodded. Crane had wasted no time filing his petition with Judge Whitmore. The hearing was scheduled for December 10th. I'll ride out to the camp today, Hastings said. If I push hard, I can be back by tomorrow night. Jesse stood. I'm coming with you. Mr. Mackenzie, that boy's got a brother still in that camp, Billy, 12 years old. When Emmett ran, Billy helped him escape. Took a beating for it. I'm coming. Hastings studied him for a long moment and then nodded. All right, but you follow my lead. This is a federal investigation and I can't have civilians complicating things. Understood. They left within the hour. Jesse made arrangements for Lucy and Emmett to stay with Mrs. O'Brien in town, unwilling to leave them alone at the ranch. Lucy protested, but Jesse was firm. I'll be back before you know it. And when I come back, I'm bringing Billy with me. Emmett's face, which had been tight with fear, relaxed fractionally. You'll really bring him home. I promise. The ride to Crane's camp took them through rough country, 60 miles west through hills and scrub brush into territory so remote that screams wouldn't carry. They rode hard, stopping only to rest the horses. Hastings talked as they rode, asking questions about Crane, about Emmett's story, about Jesse's plans. Jesse answered honestly, holding nothing back. You know this could backfire, Hastings said as they paused to water the horses at a creek. If Whitmore rules against you and you refuse to hand over the boy, they'll arrest you. Let them try. You've got a daughter to think about. I know, but I've also got a son now. 2 sons if we can find Billy. And I'm not abandoning either one. Hastings shook his head, but there was respect in his eyes. You're either the bravest man I've met or the biggest fool. Probably both. They reached the camp an hour before dawn on the second day. Hastings had them hold back in the trees, waiting for enough light to see clearly. What they saw made Jesse's hands clench white on his reins. The camp sprawled across a valley, a collection of ragged tents and crude shelters. A section of railroad track ran through the middle, gleaming dully in the early light. And around it, moving like ghosts, were children. At least 20 of them, some as young as 6. All thin, all wearing rags, all moving with the mechanical precision of people who'd learned that hesitation brought pain. As the sun rose higher, Jesse could see the guards. 3 men with rifles walking the perimeter. One of them was Clay, the short, heavy man who'd ridden to Jesse's ranch with Crane. Where's Crane? Hastings whispered. Jesse scanned the camp and spotted him. The scarred man stood near a large tent shouting orders. Even from a distance, Jesse could hear the cruelty in his voice, could see the way the children flinched at his approach. We need to get closer, Hastings said. See if we can identify Billy and document conditions. They tethered their horses and moved through the brush on foot. Hastings had a camera in his saddlebag, one of the new portable models. He set it up behind a rock and started taking photographs, the shutter clicking softly. Jesse watched the children work. Watched them strain under loads too heavy for their small frames. Watched a guard hit a boy who'd stumbled, knocking him to the ground with casual brutality. His rage was a living thing, burning in his chest, demanding release. He forced it down, kept himself still. Shooting the guard wouldn't help. It would only get him arrested and leave Emmett with no one. Then he saw him. A boy taller than the others, maybe 12 years old. Dark hair, moving with a pronounced limp. One eye swollen shut from a recent beating. Billy. Jesse knew it in his bones. This was Emmett's brother, the boy who'd sacrificed himself so Emmett could escape. He pointed and Hastings nodded. The marshal took several photographs documenting Billy's injuries, the working conditions, the guards with weapons. We have enough, Hastings whispered. Let's go. Wait! Jesse was watching Billy. The boy had stopped working. He'd turned toward the trees, toward where Jesse and Hastings hid, and his one good eye was staring right at them. For a long moment, neither moved. Then Billy very slowly shook his head. A warning. Get down. Hide. Don't let them see you. A 12-year-old boy, beaten and starving, more concerned about protecting strangers than saving himself. Jesse's throat closed up. He ducked down behind the rock, pulling Hastings with him. They waited, hearts pounding, while guards walked past not 10 feet from their position. When it was safe to move, they retreated through the brush back to their horses. They rode hard away from the camp, not stopping until they'd put 5 miles between themselves and that valley of horrors. Hastings pulled out his photographs, studying them in the daylight. His face was grim. This is enough to arrest Crane. Multiple counts, child endangerment, forced labor. And if we can find those graves Emmett mentioned, we'll find them, Jesse said. After the hearing, after we get custody, then we come back with enough men to shut this place down permanently. Hastings nodded. Agreed, but Jesse, you need to prepare yourself. Even with this evidence, Whitmore might not rule in your favor. Then we'll deal with that when it happens. They rode through the night, pushing their horses as hard as they dared. Billy was alive, but the beating he'd taken after helping Emmett escape had done damage. The limp, the swollen eye, the way he moved slow and careful like someone nursing broken ribs. He's surviving. He's hurt, but he's tough. And Emmett, he saw us. He knew we were there. You know what he did first? Emmett shook his head, unable to speak. He warned us. Soon as he saw us hiding in the trees, he shook his head, told us to get down before the guards spotted us. His first thought wasn't escaping. It was making sure we stayed safe. That's Billy, always thinking about everyone else. That's him, Emmett whispered, his voice breaking on his brother's name. That's always been him. Lucy wrapped her arms around Emmett from behind, holding him while he cried. Jesse stayed kneeling, one hand on the boy's shoulder, letting him grieve and hope and fear all at once. Can we bring him here? Emmett asked when he could speak again. When can we get him? That's what we need to talk about, Jesse said gently. The hearing's in 9 days. We have to win custody of you first. Once that's done, once you are legally safe, then the marshal can raid the camp and bring Billy home. Emmett's face fell. So he has to stay there longer because of me. No, Jesse's voice was firm. Because of Crane. None of this is your fault. You didn't put Billy in that camp. You didn't beat him or starve him or make him work like a slave. Crane did that, and Crane's going to pay for it. But what if something happens before you can get him out? What if Crane figures out someone was watching? What if he hurts Billy worse? The questions hit too close to Jesse's own fears. He'd been thinking the same things during the long ride home. Crane was smart paranoid. If he suspected federal marshals were investigating, he might move the camp, hide the evidence. Or worse, eliminate witnesses who could testify against him. But Jesse couldn't let Emmett see that fear. The boy needed hope, needed something to hold on to. Billy's tough, Jesse said. Boss on it. He survived 4 years in that place. He can survive a few more days. Emmett pulled away, wrapping his arms around himself. I should just go back. If I go back, Crane will leave you alone. He'll stop looking. Billy will be safe. I'm not worth all this trouble. I'm just a kid nobody wanted in the first place. You should have left me at that market. Jesse stood and crossed to where Emmett sat. He pulled the boy to his feet, hands gentle but insistent on his shoulders. Let me tell you something about worth, son. Your worth isn't determined by who wanted you or didn't want you. It's not about how much money you have or what you can do for other people. Your worth comes from right here. He tapped Emmett's chest over his heart. From the fact that you're a human being, a child, and every child deserves to be safe, deserves to be fed and clothed and loved. That's not something you have to earn. It's something you're born with. Lucy moved to stand beside Emmett. She took his hand in both of hers, her grip fierce. You're my brother. That makes you worth everything. Emmett looked between them, tears still streaming down his face. And slowly, so slowly, some of the self-hatred in his expression eased. What if we lose? What if the judge says I have to go back? Then we'll deal with that when it happens, Jesse said. But Emmett, we're going into that courtroom with the truth, with proof, with people willing to stand up and say what's right. That has to count for something. The days before the hearing passed in a blur of preparation. Jesse worked from dawn to dusk, trying to keep the ranch running while also building their case. He wrote letters to everyone who'd known Catherine, asking for character references. He rode to neighboring ranches gathering support. The response surprised him. Neighbors he barely knew showed up offering help. Money, testimony, whatever Jesse needed. It turned out the story of the boy Jesse had rescued had spread through the county, like wildfire. And people were angry, angry at Crane, angry at the system that had let children suffer, angry at their own inaction. They wanted to help now, wanted to be part of making things right. Samuel Graves, the lawyer Reverend Cross had recommended, came to the ranch 4 days before the hearing. He was 65 years old with a shock of white hair and eyes sharp as broken glass. He'd been practicing law for 40 years and had seen every trick in the book. He listened to Jesse's story without interrupting, making notes in a worn leather journal. When Jesse finished, Graves sat back in his chair and steepled his fingers. "This is going to be difficult, Mr. Mackenzie. Crane has the law on his side. He has money. He has influence. What we have is the moral high ground and hope that Judge Whitmore has enough conscience left to do the right thing. Is that enough? Sometimes, not always." Graves leaned forward. "But we're going to make it enough. We're going to walk into that courtroom with every piece of evidence we can gather, medical reports, photographs, testimony from Emmett himself. And we're going to make Judge Whitmore see what he signed 3 years ago. Make him understand that his signature enabled murder. And if he doesn't want to see it, then we appeal. We take it to a higher court. We fight until there's nothing left to fight with." Graves's eyes were hard. "But I've known Nathaniel Whitmore for 20 years. He's proud. He's stubborn. But he's not evil. If we can crack through that pride, if we can make him see the truth, he'll do the right thing." Jesse wanted to believe that. Wanted to trust that justice would prevail, that goodness would triumph, that doing the right thing would be enough. But he'd lived long enough to know the world didn't work that way. Sometimes bad men won. Sometimes children died despite everyone's best efforts. Sometimes the law protected monsters instead of innocents. So he prepared for both outcomes. If they won, Emmett would be safe and they could bring Billy home. If they lost, Jesse would take both boys and run. Head west to California or north to Montana. Disappear into the vast American frontier where federal marshals and corrupt judges couldn't find them. He'd lose the ranch, lose everything he'd built. But ranches could be rebuilt. Land could be replaced. Children couldn't. The night before the hearing, Jesse sat on his porch long after the children had gone to bed. The December air was coal stars sharp and bright overhead. He thought about the hearing coming tomorrow, about standing in front of a judge and fighting for the right to keep Emmett, about what would happen if they lost. He heard the door open behind him, turned to see Emmett stepping out wrapped in a blanket. "Can't sleep." The boy shook his head and came to sit beside Jesse on the steps. They sat in silence for a while, looking out at the dark prairie. "Jesse, yeah, thank you for everything, for taking me in, for fighting for me, for making me feel like maybe I matter." Jesse's chest went tight. "You do matter, Emmett, more than you know." The boy leaned against Jesse's shoulder, and Jesse put his arm around him. They sat like that, father and son, in everything but blood, while the stars wheeled overhead and the night deepened around them. "I'm scared," Emmett whispered, "about tomorrow." "I know. I am too. What if we lose?" Jesse thought about his answer. He could lie, could promise that everything would be fine, that justice would prevail. But Emmett deserved honesty. "If we lose in court, we'll find another way. I promised I'd keep you safe, and I meant it. Even if it means breaking the law, even if it means losing everything else." Emmett looked up at him in the starlight. "You'd really do that? Give up everything for me?" "In a heartbeat." "Why, pa?" "Because you're my son now, and a father protects his children, no matter what." They sat together until Emmett dozed off, lulled by exhaustion and Jesse's steady presence. Jesse carried him inside and tucked him into the loft beside Lucy. Then he stood there for a long moment, looking at these two children who'd become his world. Tomorrow would bring the fight of his life. Tomorrow he'd stand in front of a judge and battle for the right to keep this boy safe. Tomorrow everything could change. But tonight he had a warm cabin and two children sleeping peacefully under his roof. And for now, in this moment, that was enough. He thought about Catherine, about the promise he'd made at her grave. Don't let her grow up without a father. Don't shut yourself away. He tried to keep that promise in the only way he knew how, by providing, by protecting, by staying alive and present even when grief threatened to pull him under. But he'd failed at the deeper meaning. He'd shut himself away, emotionally built walls so high that nothing could get in and nothing could get out. lived in a prison of his own making, telling himself it was safety when really it was just fear. Emmett had changed that. This broken, brave child had cracked those walls wide open, had reminded Jesse what it meant to truly live instead of just survive. And tomorrow he'd find out if love and courage and desperate hope were enough to stand against law and money and power. Jesse hoped they were. God, how he hoped they were. But hope or not, he'd fight. With everything he had, until there was nothing left. Because that's what fathers did. They fought for their children. And win or lose, Jesse Mackenzie was going to fight. The morning of December 10th, 1883 dawned cold and clear. Jesse woke before sunrise, as always. But this time sleep had been elusive, broken by dreams of courtrooms and chains and children crying in the dark. He rose quietly, dressed in the suit he'd worn to marry Catherine, the suit he'd worn to bury her. Navy blue wool, well made, but showing its age now, the fabric smelling faintly of cedar and memory. He stood before the small mirror in his bedroom and tied his tie with fingers that wanted to shake but wouldn't. A man didn't show fear, not when children were watching, not when everything hung in the balance. He studied his reflection. 7 years had carved lines into his face that hadn't been there when Catherine died, had turned his hair gray at the temples, had put shadows under his eyes that never quite went away. But there was something else there now. I'm scared, Jesse. I know, so am I. The honesty seemed to help. Emmett's shoulders relaxed fractionally. What do I do in court? Tell the truth. That's all. Just tell them what happened to you, what you saw, and remember, I'll be right there. You're not alone in this. They ate a silent breakfast. Nobody was hungry, but Jesse insisted they try. The hearing could run for hours, and he needed them to have something in their stomachs. When they finished, he hitched up the wagon, and they started the long ride to redemption. The road was frozen hard, the wagon wheels crunching over frost. Jesse drove slowly, aware of precious cargo. Lucy sat pressed against his left side, Emmett against his right, both children seeking comfort from his presence. As they drew closer to town, they began to see other wagons on the road, people heading to redemption for the hearing. Word had spread through 3 counties, the rancher taking on a railroad boss. A child's life hanging in the balance, the kind of David and Goliath story that people couldn't resist. The courthouse rose above the other buildings in Redemption, 2 stories of red brick and white columns built 10 years earlier when the county had money and ambition, the seat of law and justice. Today, it would decide Emmett's fate. Jesse pulled the wagon to a stop near the courthouse steps. Already a crowd had gathered, people milling about in small groups, speaking in hushed voices. Jesse recognized many of them. Neighbors, ranchers, townspeople who'd heard about the case and come to witness justice or its absence. Dr. Bridger was waiting on the steps, his medical bag in hand. Reverend Cross stood beside him, clutching his Bible like a shield. And near them, a tall, elderly man with white hair and sharp eyes. Samuel Graves, their lawyer. Jesse helped Lucy and Emmett down from the wagon. Emmett's legs were shaking so badly he could barely stand. Jesse put a hand on the boy's shoulder, grounding him. We're here, all of us. You're not alone. Graves approached, his expression grave but determined. Mr. Mackenzie, Emmett, the hearing starts in 30 minutes. I need to prepare you both for what's coming. They moved to a quiet corner of the courthouse lobby. Graves knelt so he was eye level with Emmett. Son, you're going to have to testify today. That means sitting in front of the judge and answering questions. Some of those questions will be hard. Some will make you remember things you'd rather forget. But it's important that you tell the truth no matter how difficult. Can you do that? Emmett nodded, not trusting his voice. Good. Now Mr. Crane's lawyer is going to try to make you look like a liar. He's going to suggest you're making things up, that you're ungrateful, that you ran away because you're lazy. Don't let him rattle you. Just keep telling the truth. Understand? Another nod. Graves straightened and turned to Jesse. And you, when you testify, Crane's lawyer is going to attack your character. He's going to point out that you have no legal claim to this boy, that you're essentially a kidnapper. Stay calm. Don't lose your temper. The moment you do, we lose credibility. I'll stay calm. Good. Because, Jesse, I'll be honest with you, this is going to be close. Crane has the law on his side. We have morality and evidence. In a perfect world, that would be enough. But we don't live in a perfect world. Before Jesse could respond, the courthouse doors opened. A clerk stepped out, his voice carrying across the lobby. The court is now in session. All parties to Mackenzie versus Crane, please enter. This was it, the moment that would determine everything. Jesse took Emmett's hand, Lucy took the other. Together, the three of them walked into the courtroom. The room was packed. Every bench filled with spectators, more standing along the walls, three deep in places. Jesse saw faces he knew and faces he didn't. All of them here to witness this moment, to see if justice would prevail or if money and power would win, as they so often did. At the front of the room, behind a raised bench, sat Judge Nathaniel Whitmore. He was in his mid-50s, with iron gray hair and a face weathered by 2 decades of making decisions that shape lives. His expression revealed nothing as he surveyed the crowded courtroom. To the left at the plaintiff's table sat Silas Crane and his lawyer. Harrison Lyle was a man in his 50s, impeccably dressed in a suit that probably cost more than Jesse made in 6 months. His hair was perfect, not a strand out of place. His manner confident, almost bored, as if this was just another day at the office. Crane himself sat motionless, his scarred face impassive. But his eyes tracked to Emmett, and Jesse saw the flash of rage there quickly suppressed. The man wanted his property back, and Jesse Mackenzie stood in the way. Jesse guided Emmett and Lucy to the defendant's table where Graves waited. They sat Emmett between Jesse and the lawyer. Lucy pressed close against her father's other side. Judge Whitmore banged his gavel. The sharp crack of wood on wood silenced the murmuring crowd. We are here today regarding a custody dispute. The plaintiff, Mr. Silas Crane, claims legal guardianship of the minor child Emmett Cole based on documents signed by this court 3 years ago. The defendant, Mr. Jesse Mackenzie, contests this guardianship and petitions for custody himself. Whitmore paused, his gaze sweeping both tables. This is not a trivial matter. A child's future, perhaps his life, hangs in the balance. I expect both parties to conduct themselves with appropriate gravity and respect for this court. Mr. Lyle, you may present your opening statement. Harrison Lyle rose smoothly, buttoning his jacket with practiced ease. He approached the bench with the confidence of a man who'd won so many times before that victory was simply expected. Your Honor, this case is fundamentally about the rule of law, about whether legal documents and court orders mean anything, or whether any man can simply ignore them when he finds them inconvenient. He gestured to the stack of documents on his table. 3 years ago, my client entered into a legal guardianship arrangement for young Emmett Cole, a child who had nothing and no one. This court reviewed that arrangement. This court approved it. The paperwork is in order. The signatures are valid. Everything was done according to law. Lyle walked toward the spectator section, his movements theatrical, calculated. Under that guardianship, mister, if we allow this, where does it end? Can anyone simply take a child they feel sorry for? Can anyone ignore legal guardianship because they disagree with how a child is raised? The law exists for a reason, Your Honor. It provides order, stability, certainty. Without it, we have chaos. Lyle walked back to his table and picked up another document. I have here affidavits from 3 physicians who examined children in Mr. Crane's program. They all attest to the children being healthy and well cared for. I have testimony from local businessmen who've worked with Mr. Crane and found him to be honest and fair. And I have the guardianship papers properly executed and filed with this court 3 years ago. He set the papers down and looked directly at Jesse. What does Mr. Mackenzie have? Emotion, sentimentality, a bleeding heart. Those are not legal arguments, Your Honor. Those don't override valid court documents. The law is clear. Mr. Crane has every right to the return of his ward. No piece of paper can transform evil into good. Graves's voice grew stronger. Slavery was once legal in this country. You could buy and sell human beings like cattle, and courts would enforce those sales. Child labor was once legal, still is in many places. You can work a child to death, and as long as you have the right paperwork, nobody stops you. He turned to face Crane directly. But just because something is legal doesn't make it right. And just because this court signed papers 3 years ago doesn't mean those papers should stand when we have proof that they were based on lies. He gestured toward Emmett. That boy was 5 years old when Crane took him. 5. He was starving on the streets of San Antonio, desperate enough to go with anyone who promised food. Crane promised him a home, promised him care, promised him a future. Graves's voice dropped, became harder. What did Crane actually give him? 3 years of slavery. 3 years of beatings and starvation and watching other children die. 3 years of hell that no child should endure. Lyle stood. Objection. Counsel is making inflammatory statements without evidence. Then let's provide the evidence, Graves shot back. Your Honor, I have photographs taken by Federal Marshal Tom Hastings showing the conditions at Crane's camp. I have medical testimony from Dr. Henry Bridger documenting the abuse Emmett suffered. And I have Emmett himself ready to tell this court exactly what happened in that camp. Whitmore leaned forward. You'll have your chance to present evidence, Mr. Graves. Continue your opening. Graves nodded. Your Honor, this court made a mistake 3 years ago. I'm not saying it was intentional. I'm not accusing this court of malice or corruption. I'm saying Crane lied. He presented himself as a charitable man helping orphans. He hid what he was really doing. And this court, acting in good faith, signed papers that gave him legal cover to torture children. He walked over to where Emmett sat and put his hand gently on the boy's shoulder. Now we have a chance to correct that mistake, to admit that those papers were based on fraud and misrepresentation, to say that no piece of paper, no matter how official it looks, no matter whose signature is on it, gives anyone the right to abuse a child. His voice rose with controlled passion. Mr. Mackenzie didn't kidnap this child, Your Honor. He saved him. He saw a boy freezing and starving, and he did what any decent human being should do. He helped. And I'm going to prove to this court that if Emmett Cole is sent back to Silas Crane, it will be a death sentence, because children don't survive that camp. They die there, and they're buried in unmarked graves where nobody will ever find them. The courtroom was absolutely silent. Even the people standing along the walls had stopped shifting. Graves returned to his table. Thank you, Your Honor. Whitmore made a note on the pad in front of him, his face revealing nothing. Mr. Lyle, call your first witness. Lyle stood smoothing his vest. The plaintiff calls Silas Crane. Crane rose and walked to the witness stand with the bearing of a man who had nothing to hide. He was a big man, broad across the shoulders, with that scar running down his left cheek like a badge of honor. He placed his hand on the Bible the clerk held out and swore to tell the truth in a voice that carried confidence. Lyle approached with a friendly smile. Mr. Crane, please tell the court about your work program for orphaned children. Crane's voice was smooth, reasonable, the voice of a man explaining something simple and obvious. I run a railroad construction operation about 60 miles west of here in the hill country. It's hard work, but it's honest work. 3 years ago, I saw a problem we have in this territory. Orphaned children living on the streets, starving, dying, nobody caring about them, nobody taking responsibility. He paused as if the memory pained him. So I decided to do something about it. I started taking in these children, giving them food and shelter, teaching them skills they could use to make a living. What kind of skills? Railroad construction, how to lay track, how to work with tools, carpentry, basic labor, the kind of skills that will let them find work anywhere in this country. And how many children are currently in your program? 23 at last count. The number varies. Some leave when they turn 14 or 15 ready to work on their own. Others join when I find them abandoned. Do you pay these children wages? Lyle's question was careful and Crane's answer was practiced. I provide everything they need, food 3 times a day, clothing, shelter, medical care when necessary. That's worth far more than cash wages to a child who had nothing. Tell the court about your relationship with Emmett Cole. Crane's face took on an expression of sadness that might have been convincing if Jesse hadn't known the truth. I found Emmett 3 years ago in San Antonio. He was 5 years old, living in an alley behind a saloon. He was so thin I could count his ribs, eating from trash bins, sleeping in his own filth. It broke my heart. What did you do? I took him in, cleaned him up, fed him, gave him warm clothes and a place to sleep. I treated him like I'd treat my own son if I had one. And how did he respond to this care? For the first 2 years he did well. He was a good worker, kept his head down, did what he was told. But this past year he started having trouble, became lazy, stopped working as hard as the other children. What did you do about that? I tried discipline, nothing harsh, just firm guidance. The kind of correction any father would give a wayward child. But Emmett resisted. He became defiant. And then what happened? In November, he ran away, stole food and supplies, and disappeared in the middle of the night. I've been searching for him ever since, worried sick about his welfare. When you found him at Mr. Mackenzie's ranch, what did you do? I asked politely for his return. I showed Mr. Mackenzie the legal guardianship papers. I explained that Emmett was my responsibility, my legal ward. I tried to be reasonable. And how did Mr. Mackenzie respond? He refused, threatened me with a rifle, told me to leave his property and never come back. He's held Emmett unlawfully ever since. Lyle nodded as if this confirmed everything he'd suspected. No further questions, Your Honor. Whitmore looked at Graves. Your witness, counselor. Graves stood and approached Crane slowly. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but sharp as a blade. Mr. Crane, you say you found Emmett on the streets of San Antonio 3 years ago. That's correct. Did you make any attempt to find his family before taking him? He said he had no family. His mother was dead. He was 5 years old. Did you verify this check with local authorities, churches, anyone who might have been looking for him? Crane's jaw tightened slightly. I did what was necessary to help a child in need, which was nothing. You saw a vulnerable child, and you took him, just like you've taken 23 other children. Objection, Lyle called. Counsel is testifying. Sustained, Whitmore said. Mr. Graves asked questions. Graves nodded. Mr. Crane, you testified that you provide food 3 times a day. What exactly do these children eat? Basic food, cornmeal, beans, occasionally meat. How much food per meal? Enough to keep them healthy and working. That's not an answer. How much? Crane shifted in his seat. A bowl of mush in the morning. Or is it to prevent the children from escaping? Objection. Overruled. Answer the question, Mr. Crane. The guards ensure the children's safety and provide supervision for dangerous work. Graves picked up another photograph. This image shows what appears to be a metal container sitting in full sun. What is that used for? Storage. Storage of what? Equipment. Tools. Mr. Crane, isn't it true that you locked children inside that container as punishment? Crane's hands gripped the witness stand. That's a lie. Emmett Cole will testify that he was locked inside that box 3 times. That in summer the temperature inside reaches over 100 degrees. That children have passed out from the heat. Is Emmett lying? The boy is mistaken. About being locked in an oven, that's quite a specific mistake. Lyle stood. Objection. Counsel is badgering the witness. I'll move on, Graves said. He set the photograph down. Mr. Whitmore's gavel cracked repeatedly. Order, I will have order. When the room finally quieted, Graves continued. Mr. Crane, a boy named Samuel, died in your camp approximately 18 months ago. He was 9 years old. A railroad tie fell on his leg, crushing it. You refused to get him medical treatment. He died of infection 3 days later. Do you deny this? I don't recall any boy named Samuel. A boy named Daniel was tied to railroad tracks overnight as punishment for attempting to escape. He suffered severe frostbite and died a month later. Do you deny this? These are fabrications. Are they? Emmett Cole witnessed both deaths. He can describe them in detail. Is he fabricating? The boy is lying to avoid honest work and to justify his theft. Graves walked closer to Crane, his voice dropping but somehow carrying even better in the silent courtroom. Tell this court the truth, Mr. Crane. You don't run a charity, do you? You run a labor camp. You use orphan children as slave labor because they're free and nobody cares if they die. Isn't that the truth? Lyle was shouting objections. Whitmore was gaveling, but Crane's carefully constructed facade was cracking. Those children would be dead without me. His voice rose to a shout. I give them purpose. I make them useful instead of wasting away on streets. By beating them, by teaching them that life isn't bardawi, that work builds character. By starving them, by teaching them to earn their keep. By burying them in unmarked graves when they're too broken to work anymore. Crane's eyes were wild now, his face purple with rage. Some children are weak. That's not my fault. The strong survive. That's how the world works. The courtroom fell absolutely silent. Even Lyle looked shocked at his client's outburst. Graves spoke quietly. No further questions, Your Honor. Crane seemed to realize what he'd said. His mouth opened and closed like a fish drowning in air. "You may step down, Mr. Crane." Crane walked back to his table on unsteady legs. Lyle leaned over and whispered urgently in his ear, but the damage was done. Whitmore looked at Graves. "Call your next witness, counselor." "I call Emmett Cole." The courtroom fell silent as Emmett stood. His legs were shaking, but he walked to the witness stand with his head up. Lucy squeezed Jesse's hands so hard it hurt. The clerk administered the oath. Emmett's voice was quiet but clear as he promised to tell the truth. Graves approached gently, his manner almost grandfatherly. "Emmett, I know this is difficult, but I need you to tell Judge Whitmore what really happened at Mr. Crane's camp. Can you do that?" Emmett nodded, his hands gripping the arms of the chair. "Yes, sir." "How did you come to be in Mr. Crane's custody?" "My mother died when I was 5. Fever. It happened fast. 2 days from when she got sick to when she died. I didn't have anyone else. No father, no aunts or uncles, nobody." "What did you do?" "I lived on the streets in San Antonio, slept in alleys, ate from trash bins when I could find them, tried to stay warm, tried to stay alive." "How long did you live like that?" "Maybe 3 months. Time gets fuzzy when you're always hungry." "Then what happened?" "Mr. Crane found me one day. He said he had a place for kids like me, kids with nowhere to go. He said if I came with him, I'd have food and a bed. He said he'd take care of me." Emmett's voice grew stronger as he continued. "I was 5 and starving. I would have gone with anyone who said they'd feed me." "Tell the judge what the camp was really like." "It wasn't what he promised. There were maybe 25 kids there, all different ages. The youngest was maybe 6. We all slept in one big tent on the ground. No beds, just dirt and whatever blankets we could find." "What kind of work did you do?" "Railroad work. Building track through the hills. We'd carry railroad ties that weighed more than we did, drive spikes with sledgehammers that were too heavy for us to lift properly. Clear brush, dig, whatever Mr. Crane told us to do." "How many hours a day did you work?" "From before the sun came up until after it went down. Sometimes 15, 16 hours. Longer if we didn't finish what Mr. Crane said we had to finish." "Were you paid for this work?" "No, sir. We got food if we worked hard enough." "What happened if you didn't work hard enough?" Emmett's voice dropped. "We didn't eat that day, or we got beaten, or we got put in the box." "Tell the judge about the box." "It's a metal container, like an oven. They'd lock you inside for hours, sometimes a whole day. In summer, it got so hot you couldn't breathe. You'd bang on the sides, begging to be let out, but nobody would come." "Did this happen to you, Bayi?" "Yes, sir, 3 times." "Why were you put in the box?" "Once because I couldn't lift a railroad tie fast enough. Once because I asked for water when we weren't supposed to. Once because I cried when another boy got hurt." Graves picked up Dr. Bridger's medical report. "Emmett, Dr. Bridger examined you when you came to stay with Mr. Mackenzie. He found scars on your back." "How did you get those scars?" "Mr. Crane beat me with a leather strap." "How many times did this happen?" Emmett's eyes filled with tears. "I don't know. More times than I can count. Whenever he said I needed discipline." "Did he beat the other children too?" "Yes, sir. All of us, some worse than others." Graves paused, letting the courtroom absorb this. "Emmett, Mr. Crane testified that children don't die at his camp. Is that true?" "No, sir. Kids died." "Tell us about that." Emmett took a shaky breath. "There was a boy named Samuel. He was 9, strong for his age. One day we were moving a railroad tie and it fell wrong, landed on Samuel's leg. We all heard the bones break. 3 loud snaps." "What happened to Samuel?" "We carried him back to camp. His leg was bent the wrong way. Bone was sticking through the skin. We begged Mr. Crane to get a doctor. We begged him." Emmett's tears were flowing freely now. "But he said doctors cost too much money. He said Samuel just needed to rest and he'd heal up fine. But his leg got infected, started turning black, started to smell." Samuel screamed for 3 days straight, begging for help, begging someone to make it stop. And then on the 4th day, he stopped screaming. By the 5th day, he was dead. Mr. Crane made some of the older boy bury him out in the brush. No marker, no name, like he'd never existed. Several women in the gallery were crying now. Even some of the men looked shaken. Were there other deaths? Yes, sir. A boy named Daniel. He was 11. About a year ago, he tried to run away. Got maybe 2 miles before Mr. Crane's men caught him. What did they do to Daniel? They brought him back to camp and made all of us watch while they tied him to the railroad tracks. Graves held up a hand. To be clear, they laid him across the tracks in the path of a train. No, sir. They tied him along the tracks, ropes on his wrists and ankles, stretched out so he couldn't move. Then they left him there all night. Why would they do that? To teach the rest of us what happened if we tried to run. Mr. Crane stood there and said anyone who tried to help Daniel would take his place. What were the conditions that night? Cold. It was November. Maybe colder than now. We could hear Daniel's crying, begging, praying for someone to help him. But we were too scared. What happened to Daniel? In the morning, his fingers and toes were black from frostbite. He couldn't talk anymore. Could barely walk. He lived another month, but he was never right after that. Couldn't work. Could barely feed himself. Then one morning we woke up and he was gone. Where did he go? Emmett looked directly at Crane. Mr. Crane said he ran away again. But we all knew the truth. Daniel was dead and Mr. Crane had buried him with the others. How many children do you think are buried out there? I don't know for sure. More than 5. Maybe 10. Some died before I got there. Some died while I was there. Kids got sick or hurt or just wore out, and Mr. Crane buried them where nobody would find them. The courtroom was completely silent except for Emmett's voice. Why didn't you tell anyone? Why didn't you ask for help? Who would we tell? We were in the middle of nowhere. The only people who came were the ones delivering supplies, and they worked for Mr. Crane. If we tried to talk to them, we got beaten. Emmett, one more question. Do you have any other family? My brother Billy, he's 12. Where is Billy now? Still at Mr. Crane's camp. Why isn't he here with you? Because when I ran away, Billy helped me. He hit one of the guards with a shovel so I could slip away in the dark. I heard Mr. Crane beating him after I was gone, heard Billy screaming, but I didn't go back. I just kept running. Emmett's voice broke completely. I left my brother there, and I don't even know if he's alive. He was sobbing now, and several people in the gallery were crying with him. Emmett, why did you let Mr. Mackenzie help you? Because I was freezing and starving and I wanted to live. I'd been running for 3 days, hiding in wagons, eating whatever I could find. I was so tired I could barely stand. Has Mr. Mackenzie treated you well? Emmett looked at Jesse, and something in his expression made Jesse's chest tight. Better than anyone in my whole life, he gave me food, real food, not scraps. He gave me clothes that fit and a bed that was warm. He let me sleep without being scared someone would hurt me. He and Lucy made me feel like maybe I was worth something. Do you want to stay with Mr. Mackenzie? Yes, sir, more than anything in the world. Even though it might mean Mr. Crane hurts your brother in revenge. Emmett met Jesse's eyes. Mr. Mackenzie promised we'd get Billy out too. He promised we'd both be safe. And I believe him. He keeps his promises. Graves turned to the judge. No further questions, Your Honor. Whitmore looked at Lyle, your witness counselor. Lyle stood and approached Emmett. His earlier confidence was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like desperation. Mr. Cole, you're 8 years old. How can this court trust what you remember? Children have active imaginations. They exaggerate. I'm not exaggerating, so are you sure, or are you repeating what Mr. Mackenzie told you to say to help him win this case? Emmett's eyes flashed with sudden fire. Nobody told me what to say. I'm telling the truth about what happened to me and the other kids. A convenient truth, one that gets you out of honest work and into a comfortable home with people who feel sorry for you. It's not about comfort. It's about not being beaten. It's about not watching my friends die. His voice rose, all the pain and rage of 3 years pouring out. It's about not being so hungry you can't think, about not being so scared you can't sleep, about not having to dig graves for kids who should still be alive. The courtroom erupted. Whitmore gavelled for silence. Lyle tried again, but his voice was weaker. Mr. Cole, when you left Mr. Crane's care, you took food that didn't belong to you. That's theft. Do you deny it? I took one piece of bread and a blanket because I was starving, and it was winter, and I would have died without them. Is that worse than what Mr. Crane did to us? The question hung in the air. Lyle had no answer. No further questions. Emmett stepped down. Jesse met him at the gate and pulled him into his arms. The boy was shaking violently. You did perfect, son. Perfect. Over the next hour, Graves called witness after witness. Dr. Bridger testified about Emmett's injuries, his voice clinical, but his anger barely controlled. Reverend Cross spoke about Jesse's character and his devotion to Lucy over 7 years of single parenthood. Marshal Hastings described what he'd seen at the camp and presented the photographs as evidence. The photographs passed through the courtroom, each person who saw them looking more horrified than the last. Finally, Graves stood. Your Honor, we have one more witness. I call Jesse Mackenzie. Jesse stood and walked to the witness stand. He swore to tell the truth and sat down, very aware of every eye in the courtroom watching him. Graves approached. Mr. Mackenzie, why did you take Emmett Cole into your home? Jesse looked at his daughter, then at Emmett. Because my daughter asked me if we could keep him. She saw a child suffering and wanted to help. And I realized I'd spent 7 years hiding from life because I was afraid of getting hurt again. Tell the court what you mean by that. My wife Catherine died 7 years ago giving birth to Lucy. My younger brother Thomas died when I was 15, and I couldn't save him either. After Catherine died, I swore I'd never let myself care that much about anyone again. It hurt too much to lose people. What changed? Emmett. When I saw him at that market freezing and starving, I saw my brother. I saw every person I'd walk past because it wasn't my problem. And I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't walk away from a child who needed help. Even knowing Mr. Crane had legal guardianship papers, even then, because there are things more important than papers, Your Honor. That boy's life is more important than a signature on a document. What kind of home have you provided for Emmett? The same home I've provided for Lucy. Food, warmth, safety, love. The things every child deserves. Mr. Mackenzie, what would you do if this court ruled against you today? Jesse met Judge Whitmore's eyes directly. I'd appeal the decision, and if the appeal failed, I'd find another way to keep him safe, even if it meant breaking the law. Even then, Maya. Yes, sir, even then, because I'm his father now. Not on paper, maybe, but in every way that matters. And a father protects his children, no matter what. You understand, you're essentially admitting you'd defy a court order? I'm saying I'd do whatever it takes to protect my son. The same thing you'd do for your children, Your Honor. The same thing any good father would do. For just a moment, something flickered across Whitmore's granite face. Then it was gone. Thank you, Mr. Mackenzie. You may step down. Jesse returned to his seat. Lucy grabbed one hand, Emmett the other. Whitmore looked at both lawyers. Do either of you have additional witnesses? No, Your Honor, they said in unison. Then I'm ready to rule. The courtroom held its collective breath. I've been a judge for 20 years, Whitmore began. In that time, I've made thousands of rulings on thousands of cases. Most were straightforward. Clear law applied to clear facts, producing clear outcomes. But some cases, the rare ones, test what law really means, what justice really requires. He paused. 3 years ago, Silas Crane came before this court seeking guardianship of orphaned children. He presented himself as a charitable man providing care for the helpless. The paperwork was in order. I had no reason to doubt him. I signed those papers in good faith. Crane sat forward, his knuckles white on the table. But good faith doesn't excuse willful blindness, and it doesn't excuse allowing evil to continue once you know about it. Whitmore's voice grew harder. Today, I've heard testimony that shocks the conscience. Medical evidence of systematic abuse. Photographic evidence of children laboring under armed guard like prisoners. Eyewitness testimony of children dying from neglect and deliberate cruelty. He looked directly at Lyle. Mr. Lyle argues that the law is on his side, that the guardianship papers are valid and must be honored. And from a purely technical standpoint, he's correct. Jesse's heart sank. They'd lost. However, Whitmore leaned forward. Courts have inherent power to void contracts and legal instruments that were procured through fraud or used for illegal purposes. This power exists precisely for cases like this one. Jesse's breath caught. Mr. Crane obtained guardianship under false pretenses. He represented that he would care for these children, provide for their welfare. Instead, he enslaved them. He worked them to the point of collapse. He beat them. He starved them. And when they could work no more, he buried them in unmarked graves. Whitmore's voice grew hard as iron. That is not guardianship. That is not care. That is criminal conduct masquerading as charity. He looked directly at Crane. I hereby void the guardianship papers signed 3 years ago on grounds of fraud, misrepresentation, and used for illegal purposes. Mr. Crane, you no longer have any legal claim to Emmett Cole or any other child in your custody. The courtroom erupted, people cheering, Crane jumping to his feet in rage. You can't do this. Those papers are legal. Whitmore's gavel cracked like thunder. Sit down, Mr. Crane, or I'll hold you in contempt. Lyle grabbed his client's arm and forced him back into his seat. Furthermore, I'm granting Mr. Mackenzie's petition for custody. Effective immediately, Emmett Cole is his legal son with all rights and protections that entails. Jesse felt tears streaming down his face. Lucy was crying. Emmett had collapsed against him, sobbing. But Whitmore wasn't finished. Marshal Hastings, please stand. The marshal rose. I'm issuing a federal warrant for the arrest of Silas Crane on charges of child endangerment, forced labor assault, and murder. You are ordered to take him into custody immediately. 2 deputies moved forward and grabbed Crane's arms. He struggled, shouting, "This is outrageous! I'll appeal. I'll take this to the Territorial Supreme Court." You do that, Whitmore said coldly, and when you do, they'll see the same evidence I saw today. They'll hear the same testimony, and they'll reach the same conclusion. He turned back to Hastings. Marshal, you're further ordered to raid Mr. Crane's camp immediately. Take into custody all children found there. Those children are to be evaluated medically and placed with suitable families or proper orphanages until permanent arrangements can be made. Yes, Your Honor. One more thing. Whitmore's voice softened slightly. Marshal Hastings will be searching for a boy named Billy Cole, Emmett's brother. When he's found, I'm granting Mr. Mackenzie temporary custody pending a hearing to make it permanent. Emmett's sobs echoed through the courtroom. This court is adjourned. The gavel fell for the final time. Chaos erupted, people rushing forward. Dr. Bridger and Reverend Cross embracing Jesse. Mrs. O'Brien crying into her handkerchief. Crane being dragged out in handcuffs, still shouting threats. But Jesse was focused only on the children in his arms. Emmett and Lucy both crying, both holding on. We won, Emmett whispered. We actually won. We won, Jesse confirmed. You're mine now, legal and forever. And Billy, we're bringing him home today. I'm riding with the marshal to get him. Can I come? Jesse started to say no, then looked at Emmett's face and changed his mind. Yeah, you can come. He's your brother. You should be there when we bring him home. They rode out 2 hours after the trial ended, while Crane was being locked in the town jail. Marshal Hastings led 6 of his deputies. Jesse and Emmett rode together on Jesse's horse. 8 riders in total. Lucy stayed behind in town with Dr. Bridger and Mrs. O'Brien, though she'd protested fiercely. Jesse had been firm. The camp was no place for a 6-year-old girl. The ride to the camp took them through the afternoon and into evening. They pushed hard, wanting to hit the camp before word of Crane's arrest could reach his men. Night had fallen when they finally approached the valley. Hastings deployed his men in a circle around the camp, cutting off escape routes. Then they moved in. The camp was settling for the night. Children huddled around fires. Guards lounging with bottles of whiskey. Nobody expected a raid. Federal Marshal, Hastings' voice boomed across the camp. Everyone on the ground now. For a moment, nobody moved. Then one guard reached for his rifle. Don't, Hastings warned, his pistol aimed. I will shoot you. The guard looked at the ring of armed men surrounding the camp and slowly raised his hands. The other 2 guards followed suit. Where's Crane? Hastings demanded. Got arrested this morning, one guard muttered. We heard he was at some court hearing in Redemption. Anyone else in charge? Just us. Then you're all under arrest for child endangerment and assault. Deputies secure them. While the deputies handled the guards, Jesse slid off his horse and helped Emmett down. The boy's whole body was trembling. Billy, Emmett's voice cracked. Billy Cole. Children emerged from tents, blinking in the firelight. Scared. confused, not understanding what was happening. "Billy, your brother's here." Then Jesse saw him, a boy, taller than the others, limping badly out of the largest tent. Dark hair, one eye swollen shut from a recent beating, the other eye searching desperately. Emmett, Billy. The brothers ran toward each other and collided in the middle of the camp. Billy's legs gave out, and they both went down holding each other and crying. Jesse stood back, letting them have this moment. Around him, Hastings and his men were gathering the other children, assessing injuries, trying to bring order to chaos. "Marshal," one of the deputies called. "You need to see this." Jesse followed Hastings to the edge of the brush. What they found made his stomach turn. 6 graves, maybe more. Areas of disturbed earth marked only by weeds and rocks. "God Almighty," Hastings breathed. "We'll need to exhume them," a deputy said quietly. "For evidence of Fiji. And for proper burial," Jesse added. "These children deserve better than unmarked graves." They worked through the night documenting everything. The conditions, the injuries on the children, the graves. By dawn, they had enough evidence to hang Crane twice over. The ride back to Redemption took most of the next day. They had 23 children, many too weak or injured, to ride alongside him. Billy rode with Jesse and Emmett, the 3 of them squeezed together on one horse. Billy barely spoke. The beating he'd taken after helping Emmett escape had done damage beyond the physical. But when Emmett talked, telling him about Jesse and Lucy and the ranch, something would flicker in his good eye. Something that might become hope given time. They reached town as the sun was setting. The whole town turned out to see them lining the streets as Hastings led his procession to Dr. Bridger's office. Lucy came running with Mrs. O'Brien right behind her. "Pa, you're back!" Jesse dismounted and caught her, then helped Billy down. The older boy could barely stand, leaning heavily on Emmett. "Lucy, this is Billy, Emmett's brother. Our brother now." Lucy looked up at Billy with her mother's kind eyes. "I'm glad you're home." Billy's face did something complicated, as if he wanted to believe her, but didn't dare. "Come on," Jesse said gently. "Let's get you to Doc Bridger, get you checked out and fed." Over the next weeks, life settled into a new rhythm. Billy healed slowly, both body and mind. Doc Bridger treated his injuries and declared he'd recover fully, though he'd always have limited vision in his left eye. The other 22 children were harder to place. Doc Bridger examined each one, documenting injuries that ranged from malnutrition to broken bones that had healed wrong. Some were claimed by distant relatives who'd been searching for years. Others found homes with families throughout the county who'd been moved by the trial. The youngest, a 6-year-old boy who'd stopped speaking entirely, went to live with Reverend Cross and his wife. 5 children, too damaged to trust easily, were sent to a church orphanage in Austin where they could receive proper care. But all were freed from Crane's hell, and all would carry the scars, visible and invisible, for the rest of their lives. Crane himself stood trial 2 months later. The evidence was overwhelming. He was convicted on 17 counts, including murder, forced labor, and child endangerment. He was hanged on a cold February morning, and nobody in 3 counties mourned him. Judge Whitmore expedited Jesse's adoption of Billy, making it official in a brief hearing where the boy stood between his brother and his new father and said yes, he wanted to be Jesse Mackenzie's son. Spring came to the Texas prairie, bringing green grass and wildflowers. The ranch prospered. Jesse hired 2 hands to help with the work because he had 3 children now who needed his time and attention. Lucy blossomed, delighted to have 2 older brothers to boss around and protect. Emmett grew stronger every day, putting on weight and height, his nightmares gradually fading. And Billy, though scarred, slowly learned that not all adults hurt children, that some could be trusted. One evening in late May, Jesse stood on his porch watching the sunset paint the sky golden red. Behind him in the cabin, he could hear his children, Lucy reading aloud, Emmett and Billy playing checkers, the sounds of a family alive and well. The sound of hoofbeats made him turn. Doc Bridger rode up as he did most evenings now. The old man had taken to checking on them regularly, though they all knew it was as much for his benefit as theirs. "Evening, Jesse." "Doc." Jesse gestured to the chair beside him. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the light fade. "You know what Catherine would say if she could see you now?" Doc finally asked. Jesse smiled. "She'd say I took my sweet time figuring things out. She'd say you did good. 3 children, all of them happy and healthy. That's something to be proud of." I am, Jesse's voice was quiet. I spent 7 years thinking my life was over, that I'd never feel whole again. But these kids, they fixed something in me I didn't know was broken. That's what family does. Doc stood groaning as his joints protested. I'll be back tomorrow to check Billy's eye again. Thanks, Doc. After the doctor left, Jesse sat alone a while longer. He thought about that day at the market, about Lucy's simple question that had changed everything. Can we help him, Pa? He'd said yes, and that yes had saved 3 lives. Emmett's, Billy's, and his own. The door opened behind him. Emmett came out, followed by Billy and Lucy. Pa, Lucy said, we're going to sleep outside tonight. Look at the stars. Can we? Jesse looked at his 3 children, at their eager faces, and felt his heart swell. Yeah, we can do that. Let me get some blankets. They spread blankets on the grass and lay on their backs, 4 people looking up at the infinite sky. Lucy pointed out constellations she'd learned from books. Emmett talked about wanting to learn to read better. Billy was quiet, but his hand found Emmett's in the dark. Pa, Emmett said after a while, do you think we'll always be together like this? Jesse thought about promises and the future and all the uncertainty life held. I can't promise forever, son. Nobody can, but I can promise I'll fight for it every single day. That's good enough for me. They lay there until the stars wheeled overhead and the children drifted off one by one. Jesse carried each of them inside and tucked them into their beds. Lucy in her small room, Emmett and Billy in the loft they now shared. Then he stood in the doorway and watched them sleep. These 3 souls who'd saved him as much as he'd saved them. Forever had started with a question and a choice. And every day Jesse made that choice again. To love, to fight, to build a family from broken pieces. That was enough. That was everything. In the darkness, Jesse whispered a prayer. Not to God exactly, but to Catherine. To the memory of the woman who'd made him promise not to shut himself away. I kept my promise, Catherine. I let them in. And they made me whole again. The wind rustled through the cottonwood trees outside. And for just a moment, Jesse could have sworn he heard her voice on the breeze. I'm proud of you. He stood there a while longer, listening to his children breathe, watching over them as fathers do. As he would do for as long as he had strength in his body and love in his heart. Because that was what it meant to be a man. Not strength or power or wealth, but the willingness to stand up when others walked away. To fight when the fight was hard. To love when loving meant risking everything. Jesse Mackenzie had learned that lesson the hard way. But he'd learned it, and he would never forget.